Welcome to the Three Martini Lunch. Grab a stool next to Greg Columbus of Radio America and Jim Garrity of National Review. Three Martinis coming up.
Glad you're with us today on the Three Martini Lunch. We're brought to you today by Quip. You can get your Quip electric toothbrush starting at just $25, and you'll also get your first refill pack of brushes free at getquip.com/martini. We've got good, bad, and crazy for you today. Normal format. Jim, let's start with the good, and for that we head down to the Sunshine State of Florida. This is from the Sun-Sentinel. After hours of debate filled with gripping emotional details about the Marjory Stoneman Douglas massacre and soaring rhetoric about constitutional rights and the weighty responsibilities of elected officials, the Florida Senate voted Wednesday to permanently remove suspended Broward Sheriff Scott Israel. Now, a lot of folks will remember that Governor DeSantis did that in the first few days after becoming governor back in January. The vote in the Florida Senate was 25-15, largely along party lines. The folks over at Hot Air saying the only surprise here is that it wasn't unanimous. Scott Israel says he's going to win this job back because he did a great job. He talked about the fact that he provided amazing leadership in the wake of this horrific school shooting back last year. So, Jim, what do you make of the fact that lawmakers now have agreed with Governor DeSantis that getting rid of Scott Israel was a very good move?
It's a good outcome. It's the right outcome. There's a part of me that is surprised that anybody in the Florida legislature really wanted to have this fight. I can see why Scott Israel would want to have this fight. I'm sure he's convinced that he's done nothing wrong and that this could have happened on anybody's watch. And by golly, he ran a swell police department, and it just happened to be one guy who just didn't quite do what he was supposed to do and simply stood by as other kids were getting shot instead of confronting the gunman. And, so I a whole bunch of these interviews, he's sounded like he's not quite playing with a full deck. At one point, Tapper had that interview and he went into, what was it? Sticks and stones might break my bones, but names will never. It was something, where you just got, it was not a reassuring answer from a guy who's in charge of a law enforcement organization. And he sounded, depending on your point of view, maybe either cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs or just flat out like a politician who wanted to give political spin. And in fact, going back to that first town hall, infamously aired by CNN and moderated by, or anchored or managed by Jake Tapper, Scott Israel sounded like a guy who wanted to win re-election on a platform of gun control than a guy who was in charge of a law enforcement organization, whose job was to enforce the law and who was going to hold his department accountable for what had happened. He knew at the time that his officer at the scene had not responded, that his officer in the school had, stood there, and he didn't mention any of that. And we had to learn that a couple of days. So to me, this is, flat out indefensible. One of the best moves by DeSantis. It's really, first of all, apparently there's a photo of a Florida lawmaker, surprise, surprise, a Democrat, who fell asleep during the debate. For that, Greg, what? It's not dramatic enough for you? Stakes aren't high enough for you? This isn't keeping your attention, sir. But anyway, kind of surprising that 15 Democrats voted this way, and I don't know whether they're voting for him out of a partisan loyalty, partisan opposition to DeSantis, genuine by golly, DeSantis really did a swell job, or well, at least he's a strong advocate for gun control, and that means he should get reinstated. Either way, if you're a Florida Republican, this is fantastic because you are on the side of accountability, and a whole bunch of the Democrats, if not all of them, lined up to say, "Nah, we're cool with this. It's fine. This guy is really the real victim here." And, that's egregious, but the state's been trending red for a while. And, when Florida Democrats behave like this, you can't be the least bit surprised.
Jim, I don't have a real good read on how local officials in Broward County are doing as of late, but a year ago at this time, Scott Israel had a job and so did Brenda Snipes, and now they don't. And so I can only imagine that things are on the upswing in terms of public service there in Broward County.
Hard to believe they get worse.
The good news that we can talk about here for a moment, just as a respite, is the fact that we can once again pitch Quip electric toothbrushes. I mentioned the other day that my wife bought the kids' Quips for our girls, and they love them. And in addition to the fact that they buzz and they can keep track of 30 seconds, and we're happy that their teeth are actually getting clean, with the old toothbrushes, they'd just kind of toss them onto the counter, and you just wondered if they were staying as germ-free as possible. Quip's also got the multi-use cover, which works as a stand. It mounts to the mirror. It just tidies up the vanity, and not just for the kids, but for your adult Quip toothbrushes as well. Quip, if you don't already know, is the remarkably simple electric toothbrush. It was created by dentists, who obviously know what they're talking about, and product designers to focus on what actually matters for your oral health, which is obviously healthier oral habits.
Quip's sensitive vibrations with a built-in timer guide gentle brushing for the dentist recommended 2 minutes with 30-second pulses, ensuring an even clean. Quip automatically delivers brush heads to you every 3 months for clean new bristles right on schedule. The sleek, intuitive design is simple to use and comes with a travel cap that doubles as a mirror mount. Simply put, Quip makes brushing something you actually want to do twice a day. Your oral care matters, so ditch the gimmicks and grab a Quip.
Quip starts at just $25, and you'll also get your first refill pack of brushes free at getquip.com/martini. This is a simple way to not only support our podcast and start brushing better, but you have to go to getquip.com/martini to get your first refill free. So go right now, getquip.com/martini, getquip.com/martini. All right, Jim, yesterday we were talking about some curious polling where Americans, at least a slim majority, were saying, yeah, that Medicare for All sounds pretty good to me. Oh, you can't keep your private insurance? Well, I don't like that. Oh, we might have to pay more in taxes? I really don't like that. Oh, I might have to wait longer to get treatment? Yeah, I hate that, actually. Well, now we got some more curious polling. This was conducted by the Campaign for Free Speech, and it deals with Americans' attitudes towards the First Amendment, Jim, and this is at least equally depressing, if not more so. 51% of Americans think the First Amendment is outdated and should be rewritten. The First Amendment, in case you don't know, protects your right to free exercise of religion, the fact that the government can't create a state religion, free speech, assembly, freedom of the press, petition of grievances, and so forth. 48% believe that hate speech should be illegal. Now, it wasn't defined in the survey, and I'm guessing that most people who said yes also can't define it. Also, 80% don't actually know what the First Amendment really protects. According to the Campaign for Free Speech, those polled believe this statement is true. Quote, the First Amendment allows anyone to say their opinion no matter what, and they are protected by law from any consequences of saying those thoughts or opinions. Jim, we see in our discussions every day that people saying stupid things have consequences. They just can't necessarily be prosecuted for them. So what do you make of people so easily willing to erode their own rights here?
Deeply depressing on a whole bunch of fronts. And, it's kind of turned into one of the cliches of politics of, people ask the founders as they're coming out of the writing of the Constitution, what kind of government do we have? A republic if you can keep it, right? And the idea that, somehow we have fallen down on the job of being the kind of citizens who can maintain a republic. And people have been arguing going back to de Tocqueville, this idea that you need a certain amount of individual responsibility to function as a republic, that you can't have the government be the all-powerful daddy figure in people's lives. It can't be a nanny state. Government can't be the path to which people solve every single problem and every single dispute in their lives. It requires a certain amount of independence, a certain amount of self-motivation, shall we say, a certain amount of a way to sort out these disputes without needing the heavy hand of the state to come in and mitigate every single one of these things. It also requires you to understand what the heck the government does and what its duties are, what the duties are not supposed to be. Somebody once said the most dangerous words in the English language are, there ought to be a law. Usually coming from some irritable person at the end of the bar who has seen something on the news that irks them. And we've already seen this argument from all across the political spectrum, the idea that things I don't like should be illegal and things I don't like are unconstitutional, regardless of what the Constitution actually says. A common refrain that comes up in these arguments is the Constitution doesn't cover hate speech. Well, actually, yeah, it does. Or at the very least, Supreme Court precedents that base this. I mean, you got to be really specific if you're to characterize words as a incitement to violence. And the courts have been very reluctant to say, The president is a doofus. Well, you're calling on people to shoot the president. Therefore, you're inciting. But no, it doesn't work that way. It's got to be very, not just a particular person, or a particular group. There has to be a reasonable fear that your actions are going to do that. It's been the hot argument in politics these days. It particularly came after the shooting of Gabby Giffords. This idea that somehow angry rhetoric directed at Democrats had caused the shooter to shoot Gabby Giffords, when in fact the guy was a paranoid schizophrenic who was hearing voices. And it was, and his whole argument was that punctuation was some sort of conspiracy or something like that. This guy was not operating on any plane of existence that resembled our normal, regular, ordinary human being political discourse. And the idea that it was Sarah Palin's map on her Facebook page or something like that that spurred it was ridiculous. But the New York Times still came out and argued that in an editorial not that long ago. Most people's attitude towards the First Amendment and free speech boils down to, well, things I like should be allowed, but things I don't like should not be allowed. And they are usually pretty darn blind to how arbitrary that is, to how quickly it can change, how much they can make excuses for incendiary or heated rhetoric from people they like, and how much they can hand wave it away. I remember Bill Maher making the argument, and people said, why are you allowed to use the B word, the C word, and other words to refer to Sarah Palin, but it's completely out of line for Rush Limbaugh to say it. He said, well, because I'm a comedian. This cites the well-known comedian exemption of the First Amendment. Whatever rules you want to enact, you have to be willing to live under. Whatever rules you want to enforce on other people, you have to be willing to have enforced on yourselves. And for a long time, I've made the argument of I don't really see any purpose for state government and intervention. The only thing I would note is that if you went back to the founders and you said, what kind of speech could they envision? What kind of speech could they not envision? Because you've heard the arguments, this sort of things come from our friends at Reason Magazine and other libertarians. Lap dancing is a constitutionally protected form of speech. Now, Greg, I don't know about you. I guess traditionally I've always thought of speech as involving mouths and fewer laps. But I suppose you could make that argument, or I suppose you could say the government restricting this is a slippery slope or something. I don't think that's really that. But the people who wanted to defend Citizens United was, well, look, getting together as a group and running ads arguing about a political issue or for or against a certain candidate, the First Amendment was never meant to protect that. Well, actually, no, that's exactly what it was meant to protect. That was exactly the kind of speech that was going on in the founder. Wait, criticism of a leader is the sort of thing you're going to say is off limits? No, sorry, guys, that's not the way it worked. And that was always the big beef at Citizens United. And I know that Democrats don't like the idea that money equals speech, that somehow you can limit the amount of money people can use to advocate for a particular cause, and that somehow you're not restricting their speech rights. The Supreme Court, at least a 5-4 decision, and my guess is probably if they revisited it, the decision might be even more lopsided, would say, no, you can't enact a restriction on somebody's political spending that does not also end up restricting their right to speak their mind and say what they want. The other thing is that all of the campaign finance proposals that have been shuffled around always make exemptions for the media, which basically assumes that the New York Times editorial is not a political message, except that it is. And the arguments that the union spending usually gets exempted from this being a particular big institution. There's always an exemption for the speech by my allies doesn't count. It's not something that should be applied under here. To me, the answers are not that complicated, right? You have to accept the speech you don't like in order to protect the speech you do like. And the fact that people can't get through their heads, and apparently, judging from this poll, Greg, significant numbers of Americans just don't understand the point of the First Amendment anymore, is deeply disturbing. Now, changing the Constitution is difficult, but I think what we'll see here is probably what we probably saw from the Second Amendment for a very long time. People will pass laws that simply ignore what the First Amendment says and wait for the courts to sort it out.
As you could have expected, this is a different survey referred to by the Campaign for Free Speech. Millennials are a big part of the problem. 57% of them agree that the First Amendment should be rewritten, and 54% think possible jail time would be an appropriate consequence for hate speech. So that's where we're headed. Anyway, Jim, let's move into our Crazy Martini now, and let's talk about what happened yesterday up on Capitol Hill. Adam Schiff in the Skiff. He, of course, is the intelligence chairman. He's conducting these depositions. behind closed doors. Republicans are very upset about the process. They want it out in the open because they think we're only getting leaked snippets from these different witnesses that is favorable to the Democrats, and the Republicans who are in there say, look, if you saw all the transcripts or if they were in front of TV cameras, you would see that the Democrats don't have much of a case here. So on Wednesday, a bunch of House Republicans went into the SCIF, which is a secure facility. You're not supposed to bring phones and other electronic devices in there. They did that anyway. They sat there. They ordered pizza there. They got a lot of attention. They delayed the deposition for quite a while. And ultimately, I think things are fairly back on schedule going forward here. Jim, you think that the Republicans had a good point on this process question initially, and now they just make themselves look stupid?
Yeah, I mean, to me, that was a good, I don't want to say this, the canary in the coal mine, but, a good useful indicator came late yesterday afternoon when Amy Walter, who runs it's National Journal, she used to work at the Hotline. You probably have seen her on panel discussions on cable news shows. This woman is not a righty. Let's know. She's probably pretty close to down the middle as you're going to find in the mainstream media. And she raised the question of okay, so why can't the Democrats start releasing transcripts of some of these depositions and statements they're taking? Why can't we get transcripts? Why does all this need to be held behind closed doors? And the most common argument, first of all, again, if Amy Walter is asking that question is probably going through the minds of quite a few people who are not conservatives who are watching this process. And the most common response you get was, well, look, it's like a grand jury, and you don't want people coordinating their testimony. And if this stuff comes out, people know what the first guy said, so they're going to make sure their story matches up, and you won't get to the bottom of things. And Greg, on paper, that's a really compelling argument. The problem is there are 16 pages of Bill Taylor's opening statement that are on top of that paper. That makes sense, but we all know what Bill Taylor's opening statement was now because it was in the Washington Post and CNN and NBC News and all of these other, this and PBS. It all came out and was everywhere. We've also gotten lots of other strategic leaks. So the idea that, this works, this stuff has to remain secret because otherwise people can coordinate their testimony. Well, okay, but then stop leaking stuff. Once you start leaking, the point of keeping it secret doesn't work anymore. For what it's worth, Eric Swalwell, we all remember how much we love him, the guy who was running for president for about 10 minutes and managed to stand out as the annoying one on a stage that had Julian Castro and Beto O'Rourke. Swalwell says he thinks they're already coordinating testimony. And it was also another intelligence committee member as well. We're not seeing what they're seeing. Maybe he's being paranoid. Maybe they aren't. But this whole process is designed to stop people from coordinating their testimony. It's not working, at least in their guys. And the other thing is also it's very, again, these are all people who've been working on the same issues and working in the same places, State Department and White House and other places like that from the beginning. The odds that they've been talking to each other all along, either specifically about what they're going to testify about, or at least the topics that they're going to testify about, they've probably been talking about this all along. The other argument is, well, what if it's classified? Well, so far, again, we don't know what's going on behind these closed doors. If there is getting into classified national security information, all right, fine. That does make that would be an issue. But I haven't heard anything indicating, this is exactly how the Javelin missiles work or something like that. As far as I know, none of it has dealt with classified information. The argument, and the third thing is that, why are they fighting over who gets access to these witnesses? Can the witnesses testify? Can they get documents and records from the White House, et cetera? Trump administration says executive privilege. And most people who've studied executive privilege would say, we're getting into a real gray area here. Depending on how you define it, you could say either charcoal or off-white in terms of gray area. Most presidents have been kind of careful about how they claim executive privilege because it's never the guidelines and limits have never really been set out by the courts. And so the argument is the sketchier the area, the less you want to do it, because sooner or later this is going to spur a big court fight that will end up defining executive privilege and set a precedent for future presidents down the line. Does the president, have a good standing here? I don't know. But the argument from Schiff and the rest is, no, you don't have a right to keep this secret. You don't have, executive privilege does not apply here. It must be told to us. It must be revealed so that we can look at it in a closed session. It must be stopped. You can't keep it secret so that we can have it, and then we can keep it secret. Now, Lindsley, also, anything involving impeachment that is that consequential, Greg, you figure is going to have to be repeated in an open hearing. You figure we're going to get most of these witnesses under oath in front of the TV cameras, but the whole country can see them. If Democrats don't do that, they're making a colossal mistake. So it's possible that in a couple of weeks this is all moot, and we go through this whole process again with the cameras rolling and in a public hearing and with questions from both sides, and this all kind of shakes away. But again, this is Adam Schiff, who's had pretty lousy judgment throughout this entire process, exhibiting bad judgment again. And I think the Republicans were starting to get some momentum here. Now the argument is, well, you can believe these idiots, they brought cell phones into a skiff. What were they thinking, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a valid point here to be made. Okay, we can understand maybe the initial steps of this process have to be done behind closed doors. But guys, this started in late September. All right, we're a week from Halloween. When do we get to the opens part? And they're saying, well, maybe mid-November. Look, you can't keep impeachment process behind closed doors forever. The more you do it in public, but the sneaking, just like the decision on the House Democrats to not have a formal vote opening the inquiry, the sneaking suspicion is the reason they didn't hold the vote. The sneaking suspicion, they held the vote because even the people say they want to vote for it, they're not really willing to vote for it. And the second thing is that, we've got all this damaging stuff we're hearing in closed session. Well, if it's all that damaging, open it up then.
We'll be watching, and this was supposed to be fast-tracked. We're hearing stories now that it's taking longer than they thought, and there are also stories in the last few weeks about how if this timetable stays on the course a lot of people think, then a lot of senators running for president are going to be spending a lot of time in Washington when they really, really don't want to be there early next year. But
Greg, do you hear that? That's Joe Biden laughing hysterically. This malarkey.
Oh, man. Jim, I will not be here tomorrow, but you will be. There will be a 3 Martini lunch, so have a fantastic weekend, and I will see you again on Monday.
See you Monday, Greg.
Jim Garrity, National Review. I'm Greg Corombos, Radio America. Tune in tomorrow for the 3 Martini lunch. In the meantime, head over to getquip.com/martini. Get your Quip toothbrush and your first refill pack of brushes free. Getquip.com/martini. Tune in Friday for the next 3 Martini lunch.